So longevity is traditionally thought of as just being made of physical parameters, but that's why I'm really excited about MindCure, because it allows me to talk about what I've believed for many, many years, is that 9/10 of all diseases have their origin here. And this is where we should begin. I really appreciated Pastor Conniff's presentation about getting to the root of things, and that's a huge burden of mine. I think that we're very good fruit pickers and getting rid of the bad fruit when it's just going to grow back again. The fountain of youth is a notion that everyone, I believe, strives for. It wasn't just Ponce de Leon, but it was our society as well. And if you look at, in spite of the economic depression, in spite of all the downturn, and in spite of all the regulations for healthcare coming, you know, one arm of healthcare, one specialty is not losing any money at all. In fact, they have nothing to do with insurance. They take cash up front. Here in our own Orange County, alive and well, plastic surgery. Now, is it because people are superficial that they seek to look younger through surgery or Botox? Or perhaps you're not as manipulative as that. Perhaps you're a little bit more mild, you know, maybe you're getting rid of the gray in your hair. Or, you know, maybe they'll, you know, make up to touch up the crow's feet or something like that. Or perhaps you're not about appearance, but, you know, you're going to find that one berry that's going to keep you young forever, right? The Tahitian noni, or the herb in Tibet, or the acai berry, or whatever, right? You're going to find something. We're always looking for that magic bullet. And we are no exception. All countries in the world, I've been to over 50 countries in the world, all 6 continents. People, although they speak different languages, they have the same mind. We seek to remain forever young. But unfortunately, in spite of that desire, we all seem to follow the same dreaded pathway. But is that our design? I really appreciated what Pastor Paul said about identity, understanding our identity and who we are and not believing a lie. I believe that the desire to be not just forever young, but to live forever is not a vain desire. I think that it's expressed in maybe false ways sometimes, but in every culture, we have this belief that somehow death wasn't meant to be ours. And there is evidence. If you look at the human brain, you find that even in autopsies, people have only used about 5% of their brains. Did you know that? Isn't that strange that we would only fill up a 20th of the hard drive in our entire lives? Now, that'd be strange if you go out and buy this computer and you'd only use like 5% of the space, right? I mean, you tell the person, listen, you should have just gotten a smaller computer. Why did you waste all that money, right, when you're just going to run Microsoft Word, right? So we were designed for way more than Microsoft Word. We were designed not just to live for a few years, but to live much, much longer. In fact, they've looked at the brains of people who are considered the super geniuses of our society, the Albert Einsteins, the Schweitzers, and they get up to about 7 to 9% of the brain capacity. I mean, not even close to full. I mean, not even remotely close. So could it be that we're not just designed to live for a little while, but perhaps forever? I'm going to examine that notion by way of several articles. The first one you may be familiar with. Has anyone seen this article? You know, I think every one of us should have like boxes of this magazine. And I'm not kidding around. Boxes of this magazine. You know, you want to hand out, you know, Steps to Christ or Desire of Age at the door. How about this issue of this magazine? Let me tell you, this is going to open the wedge like none other. Because National Geographic is not published by the Review and Herald, just FYI. It's a secular publication, right? And let me tell you, it says incredible things about longevity, and it seems to focus on mostly the physical parameters, but I'm going to show you something that is going to totally open your eyes about living longer and living better. We're going to start in Okinawa, Japan. Many of you are aware that Okinawa is an island, and Japan is actually a series of islands. It's an archipelago. That's the actual word. And in Japan, people live a long time, but in Okinawa specifically, people live a really long time. The average lifespan is 78 for men and 86 for women, giving them an average of 82. Anyone know the average here in the U.S.? 79. Who said 79? That's correct. It's 79. So they outlive us by about 3 years on average. But not only do they outlive us, they live better. They have only 20% of the heart disease, a quarter of the breast and prostate cancer. They do have a plant-based diet, but they have more than that. They have something called ikigai. That's a pretty cool word, huh? Ikigai. I'd like you to all get on your ikigai for this conference, because ikigai is a Japanese word that means the reason for which you get up in the morning. It is your purpose, your being. And I believe with all my heart that one of the worst things for people is disability. Now, I say that because I'm an ER doc, and I have someone every week wanting me to sign their disability papers. And yes, there are times to go on disability for a while, right? But let me tell you, idleness, getting a check without actually having a purpose is like the worst thing. It's like death sentence. You can just sign your name there. There is nothing that is going to nuke you more than not having an ikigai, not having a purpose, a goal, an inspiration, a motivation for your life. Now, people have different ikigais. Fumiyasu, his ikigai is the decathlon. He's 84. His favorite event? The pole vault. True story. The Okinawans, in addition to their ikigai, they have a purpose in providing their own food out of their own gardens. They actually eat more food, but way less. They eat things like tofu and veggies and radishes, cauliflower, carrots. And in addition to the nutritional benefits they get the mental benefit of the actual exercise that they're doing in their gardens. They enjoy the benefit of vitamin D. Have you heard about it? Vitamin D. Just got a recent article, literally last week it was published. You already knew probably about the cancer benefits, the heart disease benefits of vitamin D. Now there's infection benefits. They looked at a series of people who were admitted to the hospital, and they drew their vitamin D levels. And the people with low vitamin D levels, all you single-digit people out there, get those up for sure. Because the mortality rates were 30% from pneumonia for low vitamin D levels compared to people who had normal or even kind of low normal levels. But of course, here in Southern California, you guys are probably okay. Well, maybe not. Remember, people who are darker pigmented like myself, like if you compare somebody who's very, very dark pigmented, like, well, I was in Sudan. Anyone been to Sudan? I mean, those brothers are dark. I mean, they're like purple almost. But the problem is that shield from the ultraviolet also blocks the vitamin D production. So if you compare someone who's very pale or white compared to someone who's like very, very dark from Sudan, it's like half as effective. So you need to spend twice as much time in the sun to get the same amount of vitamin D. So it's very, very important. They actually interviewed Serie Toguchi as he was out in his garden, and they asked him various questions about longevity, and then they finally said, "Why do you wear the red gloves?" He said, "They're easy to find." The other mental benefit we find in the Okinawans is they are part of a moai. A moai is something that is almost the antithesis of American culture. American culture, we're all independent atoms, right? We all got to have our own space. We got to live alone, right? And I'm not saying that that's wrong, right? Especially when you're married, right? Leave and cleave. That's an important principle. Some of us don't remember that somehow, but I think that's an important concept. But it's not that you're just isolated. That's the difference. And the Japanese culture, particularly the Okinawan culture, everyone belongs to a moai. And a moai is a group of people, not necessarily relatives, who go through life together and help each other. And this group of people not only helps each other mentally, but spiritually, even financially. You know, you want to know why people join gangs, right? It's because we don't have a moai. We don't have a group. We don't have belonging, right? And that is so critical to our longevity. The sense of belonging, the sense of community, not just from your family, but from the world around you. Unfortunately, Okinawa is starting to weaken as far as its longevity. And the cause of their decrease in longevity can be found between the golden arches. They have moved away from their traditional diet and their traditional culture of the togetherness, of the ikigai, things like that, and they've adopted more Western habits, which, of course, they're going to have Western mortalities now. We're going to move on to Silano, Sardinia, and that is in where? Italy, that's right. It's an island off the coast of Italy, and we will encounter a culture that is very, very close in terms of their family unit. Not only are they close with the nuclear family, but the entire extended family comes together every week and has a meal. When was the last time you knew a family that said, every one of my relatives eats together every week? I don't know, with all the dysfunction, maybe that wouldn't be a happy occasion in some of our families, right? Until we went through Pastor Conniff's seminar first. But I believe that this is very important, and we've moved away from it. In their society, this is a regular occurrence, and also a regular occurrence is them making it to 100. Typically, who lives longer, men or women? Women, by a long shot. In fact, there are 4 times as many women who live to 100 than men, but not in Sardinia. In Sardinia, the ratio is 1-to-1. Men live just as long as women, which is a very unique phenomenon that is not seen in any other place in the world. They're still trying to figure that out. They've also thought that their active outdoor life, they garden, they have purpose, they're very active. Also, the fact that they live on an island, they think may help. But I believe it is more than that. If you look at some of the interviews with the Sardinians, they said some very unique things. I believe a lot of the reason they're living longer is between their 2 ears. Giuseppe is 85 years old. They asked him if he's ever tired, and he says, of course I'm tired sometimes. And they said, well, if you're tired, you don't feel well, why don't you stay home? His answer, if I stayed home, I would be sick. Now, think about that compared to our thought process. What do our minds tell us? Stay home, right? If I don't feel well, then I stay home. Giuseppe says, if I stayed home all day, then I'd be sick. Isn't that an interesting paradigm shift? And I think that's one of the reasons that they live longer. There's other reasons too. Some people have looked at their grapes. Many of you are probably aware of the heart benefit for red and white wine. Have you heard about that, right? That's all been blown away long time ago, but no one hears about it because the studies that disprove it don't have like $5 billion behind it from the alcohol industry, so that's why nobody knows. But the reason why you have the French benefit from that body of studies is that in red and white grapes, it's not in the alcohol. Ethanol does not help you, FYI. In red and white grapes, there's quercetin and resveratrol. Have you heard of that? Very, very powerful, heart-healthy antioxidants. And they are found not only in red and white grapes, but they've compared the Sardinians' grapes, and they have super grapes. They have grapes that have 300% of those chemicals more compared to the mainland Italian red and white grapes. So when you visit Sardinia, bring me some grapes back, okay? Also, there's been criticism from researchers that they are an isolated island. And many of you have heard of the concept called genetic incubator. Have you heard of that? The people who live on an island are genetic incubators because it's hard to get off the island. It's not like they're voted off the island or something like that. They can't just leave. It's just like it's a closed society. So you tend to marry and reproduce with people who have similar genes as you. So their theory is that the original inhabitants of Sardinia were like long-lived people. And what do you know? Everyone else lives long. So that's their criticism of the Sardinian culture. In fact, 80% of the current inhabitants of Sardinia were directly related to the original inhabitants. However, Sardinia is weakening also. Obesity used to be 0% in their society, and now is at 10%. Any guess as where we are? Anyone know what our obesity rate? Now, obesity is greater than 20%, greater than your ideal weight. We're about 36%. And the percent of people that are overweight in the U.S., over the majority. It's, well, I don't know about 60, but it is greater than 50. And so the majority of us now are overweight. The other criticism for the Sardinians, there's only 2,400 of them, so can you really make conclusions on only 2,400 people? But that's not what I want to get at. I want to get at us. Can we live longer and stronger by not only our physical habits, by our mental beliefs, by our philosophies, by changing our thinking, as Pastor Conniff said? Do we even stand a chance of living to 100? How many of you live in the country? How many of you have your own garden? Wow. How many of you have your own garden and eat from it every meal? Okay, maybe not. How many of you live on an island? All right. So it's going to be tough for us to follow Okinawa and also Sardinia. Good thing for us, there's 1/3 people group that they looked at, and those are people in sweet home Loma Linda, where the skies are hazy blue. But there's also a lot of people who live a long time, and they're trying to figure out why. Well, meet Marge Chaton. She didn't live in the country. She didn't have like a place with no pollution. In fact, here she is pulling up to the Chevron station, it looks like, filling up her car, renewed her driver's license when she was 100 years old for another 5 years. And she went past those 5 years, by the way. Many of you know, do you know Marge Chaton? She lived to 106. She was a nurse. She did pass away, unfortunately. Her husband, anyone know what her husband did? He was a physician, and he lived to 98. So they both did really, really well. In fact, here's another physician. This is Frank Shearer. At 100 years old, he is the oldest water skier on the planet. He has outlived the vast majority of us, his colleagues, by several decades. Here's another one of his colleagues and one of my professors, Ellis Wareham. At 91 years old, cardiothoracic surgeon. He's retired now, but back when I was at Loma Linda, he was still going strong. And yes, you already knew who the third group is. It's the Seventh-day Adventists. Praise the Lord, right? Lydia Newton at 112 was one of our champions, one of the 20 oldest people on the face of the planet. The person who wrote the article said, is it good genes? Is it divine intervention? And his quote was, God may or may not have something to do with it, but their religion does. Seventh-day Adventists aren't just 2,400 people. There are about 20 million people around the world. Many, especially of the very oldest, do not live in the country, and they are not isolated. They come from all different races, and their common bond is lifestyle and religion. So, what can you take from it? You can take a lot of things. Yes, we always hear about diet, but I believe it's more than that. You know, the health message is not fried chick. You know, it's a lot deeper than that. I believe it goes into thinking. I believe it goes into a philosophy. I believe it goes into family connections. I believe it goes into how you view yourself and the world around you. I believe it has to do with your purpose in life. I mean, obviously, don't smoke or drink. We all know that. Family-oriented daily activity. But there's more than just that. There's another article, and I'm not going to share the whole thing. I'm just going to go through it very quickly. This is from 2011. Newsweek. Anyone heard of Newsweek? Again, not a Christian publication, right? And yet it gives you a flow chart on how to live forever. Now, are there some physical parameters? Well, sure, there's physical parameters here. There's some physical parameters that you can't change, right? Because the first step is what? You're a woman, right? You can't necessarily change that. Well, I suppose you could now with kind of the in vitro stuff, but once you've selected, that's kind of it. What I thought was also intriguing is that the second step was you're a Seventh-day Adventist. Now, this lecture is just one. There's a 13-hour series that I do on longevity, but you can go into things like, did you see the one at the bottom? I kind of cut it off, but I figured I'd tease you a little bit. It says you started formal schooling after age 6. Newsweek wrote this. That's what studies are showing. Do you think mental things have to do with your longevity? You know, anyone ever say that kids shouldn't start formal school that early? Here's another article. This is U.S. News and World Report's 2012. Again, another secular publication. They come up with the 11 habits that will help you to live to 100. Number 1, those who retire expire. There is a video summary of the article that I just gave you. And this article is not Christian. He's not Adventist or anything like that. And he's going to kind of give you his own perspective on the whole longevity question.
My name is David McLean, and I traveled to 3 different cultures of longevity, which are Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, and Loma Linda, California. So we went and spent time in each of these places and tried to learn about their cultures of longevity and exactly what it is they're doing to live vital and healthy lives well into their hundreds. The first longevity hotspot we traveled to was Sardinia, Italy. So in this region, men are living as long as women, which is just an incredible phenomenon. Science isn't exactly quite sure why, but one of the theories is that it's because the women wear the pants and that men have less stress as a result. But also the Sardinians have a fanatical zeal for the family. And we dropped by 4 generations of one family, and every weekend they shared this giant meal. And this social component of longevity is incredibly important. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is what being alive and having a family is all about. But the cultures of longevity in Sardinia are rapidly disappearing, and the root of them are a move away from traditional natural food in conjunction with a sedentary lifestyle. We spent time with a woman who was almost 100 and her great-granddaughter, and later that day we saw that same great-granddaughter eating potato chips, and we wondered, will she live as long as her great-grandmother? Okinawa is an archipelago in the far south of Japan, and it's home to the longest-lived people on Earth. And we met numerous people who were into their hundreds, who were leading active and very healthy lifestyles. You know, the 90-year-olds were biking and fishing 8 miles offshore with these old diving techniques on the reef. And we met an amazing woman who was over 100. Her name was Kamada, and she had been in a moi. The rough translation is that it's a group of friends who go through life together and help each other. And the energy and vitality that they would get from that, I believe, factored into the longevity equation as well. And the Okinawans have this wonderful word. It's called ikigai, and it translates roughly into the reason for which you wake up in the morning. And all of these centenarians had ikigai, and I don't think it's an accident that that's part of the reason that they're living so long. So one of the cornerstones of Okinawan longevity is caloric restriction. Yet, interestingly, they're eating a lot of food. The trick is that the food that they're eating is all low in caloric density. And that food included these beautiful miso soups that were filled with carrots, seaweed, onions, and potatoes. And like the Sardinians, the Okinawans grew most of the food themselves in their gardens, and they would go to the store for very little. But Okinawa is losing its longevity edge. Okinawa has the highest rate of obesity in all of Japan, and it was quite shocking and somewhat disturbing to see this culture of longevity disappearing right before our eyes. By far the most surprising fact that I took away from this story is that Seventh-day Adventists outlive their American counterparts by about 10 years. What are they doing? Quite simply, the Seventh-day Adventists, who largely populate Loma Linda, California, have a religion that reinforces positive, healthy behaviors. For example, if you're a devout Seventh-day Adventist, you are a vegetarian, non-smoker, non-drinker, who takes a Sabbath every Saturday, where for one whole day you have to just unplug. So we met many incredible people there. The most incredible by far was a woman named Marge Jatan, who had just turned 100 and renewed her driver's license. So we went for a cruise, but before we did that, we had to go through a morning routine where she lifts weights and rides a stationary bike. And interestingly, the Seventh-day Adventists are the only culture of longevity that we visited who are not losing their longevity edge. And I photographed a baptism at this church. And I remember thinking, wow, this is the perfect example of how this religion is still growing and carrying forward. I think in America we tend to marginalize old people, kind of put them away in retirement homes. But these amazing people in 3 different cultures represent a potential to see your great-grandchildren grow up, a potential to be healthy and happy well into your older years. And that to me was the biggest thing I walked away with from this assignment, was that, wow, I now have this sense of responsibility and control based on choices that I make. I'd read that genetics only account for about 30% of how long you live. So, the majority of how long you live is up to your lifestyle. It's up to you.
And now, back to the lecture. Back to U.S. News and War Reports 2012. Number 1, those who retire expire. Just remember that. As a physician, I work with a lot of the geriatric population, and I work with 2 different groups of elderly people. One group, my patients. The other group, my volunteers. Which group do you think has better health? The ones with ikigai, right? The ones who have purpose. The ones who serve other people. The way to live longer is not focus in on living longer. Does that make sense? The way to have happiness is not to try to achieve happiness. It almost seems ironic, doesn't it? But it's by focusing on others that we are most blessed. And the medical literature clearly reveals that. The people who retire and just kind of do nothing, just sit on their porch and eat, they die really soon. And I don't know, that's is that the American way or something, that people just kind of retire and just kind of kick back and do nothing? I don't know. I think it's a theory that, Medicare has come up with to save money or something because they bump you off quicker or something. But if you volunteer, if you do something, if you have a ministry, there is no question that you will live longer. Many studies bring that out. One of the things that I learned when I was reviewing the literature is number 2 is flossing. Who would have thought? Flossing makes you live longer. When they actually interviewed the principal investigator of the study, he said that although twice a day did not reach statistical significance, he believes that actually twice a day is the way to go. And the reason for that is, many of you are aware, if you don't floss for a while, what happens? And you floss again, what happens? You bleed, right? Because your gums become inflamed, and so that bacteria gets into your bloodstream, and it can actually seed into your coronary arteries, create inflammation, and start the plaque from accumulating in your coronary arteries. So you don't want that. And that is another thing that I would tell you. People always ask me, Tim, how can I tell if stuff is legit or not? I don't read the medical literature, or I don't know how to read the medical literature, or it's I fall asleep every time I read the medical literature. And so they ask me, how do I know if something is quackery or if it's legit? I'm going to give you the 1-sentence summary. If it is simple accessible to all, and cost effective, it's probably legit. If you can only get it like one place, or you have to like pay someone for it or whatever, and it's really complicated, then it's probably not legit. But I mean, flossing, I mean, how much simpler can you get than that? It's a piece of string, right? I mean, how long does it take you to teach someone to floss? 5 minutes? How much does it cost? You know, the pack of floss I bought recently was 87 cents, right? So it's not proprietary. No one can copyright string, right? So it's legit. Number 3, of all the physical parameters, if you were to take one of them as the fountain of youth, it would be exercise. If they look at meta-analyses on exercise, that means they take all the studies on exercise and kind of boil them down to like one sentence. The summary is the following. Every hour you spend exercising, you will live that hour over again and 2 or 3 more hours on top of it. And you will enjoy not just better quantity, but better quality and a clearer mind and a stronger spirit. Number 4, of course, we all eat breakfast, right? Everyone eat breakfast? Well, 3 people eat breakfast back there. Hopefully more of us. At MindCure, we're going to eat breakfast, though, for sure. They've found if you eat a fiber-rich cereal for breakfast, not only does it regulate your blood sugar for that meal, but for the rest of the day, and you will live longer if you do it consistently. Okay, for the students at Loma Linda, I have to say it, sorry, you got to sleep more than 6 hours a night. I know it doesn't seem like it's possible, but you don't want to burn off years away from your life by the sleep deprivation. And of course, I'm speaking to myself. I'm a physician. I went through residency. Before the hours law was passed, I walked uphill in the snow both ways, backwards, bare feet. But you don't have to do that, right? You guys only have to work, 80 hours a week? 90, I guess, sometimes. Hopefully it's not as bad as when I was there. But yes, do sleep more, and you will live longer. They actually looked at the literature of people who slept 9 or 10 hours, and they found that those people lived shorter. Now, the reason why is when they look closer at the data, is they found that the people that were sleeping 9 or 10 hours every night were actually hungover and not really sleeping. So don't feel bad if you're sleeping more than 8 hours. As long as it's not because you're like self-medicating, as we talked about earlier, then it's probably going to be okay. Number 6, eat whole foods. And I want to give a little plug here about supplements. There was a Scandinavian study that looked at smokers and lung cancer. They divided it into 3 arms. First arm was the control group. So what did they do? They just smoked, right? Nothing else, no intervention. Second group, they gave them antioxidant vitamins. Anyone know what the antioxidant vitamins are? Vitamin A, C, E, and there's a mineral. Selenium, right? Where do you get selenium? Yes, 2 Brazil nuts gives you all you need. Who knew that? That was very good. All right, very good. So they gave them antioxidant vitamins. The third group, they gave them A, C, E, and selenium in the form of food in the same quantities. And then they followed these people to see if they would get what? What do you think they're going to get? They smoke. Lung cancer, right? So the people who were the control group, what do you think they got? Lung cancer, right? The people in the food group that ate all the good veggies and Brazil nuts and whatever, do you think they got less or more lung cancer? Yes. But they stopped the study midstream because the vitamin group got more cancer than the control group. True story. But not all literature shows that vitamins are evil. But in this case, they had to stop the study, take away the vitamins, and then offer everybody the vegetables and the fruits and things like that. Because when you're in normal, like IRB sort of stuff, like the ethics committee says that if you see a difference in mortality in your groups, by law and ethics, you have to offer everybody the thing that gave the advantage. Otherwise, you're not a nice person, right? And they wouldn't let you do studies anymore. So eat whole foods. If you want to supplement juice, if you want to talk to me more about juicing, I can talk to you more about that later. I don't own a juicing company, don't worry. Number 7, huge. It's not always what you're eating. It's what's eating you that causes you to die. Anyone know the personality that actually lives shorter? There's a type of personality, type A. But does anyone know the 2 traits within type A that they examined as subsets that were really the culprits? Because it wasn't punctuality. It wasn't ambition. It wasn't leadership. It wasn't any of those things. Anyone know what the 2 were? It was hostility and intolerance. It's okay for you to hold yourself to a high standard, but when someone doesn't meet your standard, and you get angry, that will kill you. In fact, there are good studies that show that during a bout of anger, even if it's just fleeting, for the next 2 hours, you triple your risk of fatal MI. Adrenaline is not good for you. And that's what it causes. A lot of these negative sort of emotions, negative thought process, like violent toward other people sort of thinking, that causes epinephrine and norepinephrine to course through your veins at a time when you're not physically active to produce the enzyme, which is catechol-methyltransferase, which is beyond this lecture. But that enzyme actually breaks those things down right away. And when you exercise, you get the enzyme plus the hormone. But when you're angry, you just get the hormone, which is not good for you and not good for other people that you're venting whatever the hostility is on. Number 8 in U.S. News and World Reports. Now, I have to confess, if you read the article, it does not say what I put up there. It says, live like a Seventh-day Adventist. But I'm just going to say be a Seventh-day Adventist. So if you look at the longevity of the United States, what was the average? U.S. 79. Average Adventist? 89. Remember, average Okinawan was only 82. That's pretty crazy. That's amazing. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. Number 9, be a creature of habit. Now, you'd think that wouldn't matter, but it does. Our body, we have just scratched the surface on rhythms. Like you've heard of circadian rhythms, right? But there's so many other rhythms in our body. And what they're finding is if you get up, go to sleep, eat, exercise, and do like everything else possible at the same time every day, it's really good for you. So being like an ER doc that works shift work, it's like going to kill me, I'm sure. But hopefully not before I share with the whole world, right? Number 10, like we learned before, stay connected, not just to your relatives, but to people around you. Remember the moai, right? Remember the ikigai, stuff like that. As far as specific relationships, there's good evidence that shows that you will live longer and have less depression if you stay in touch with your sister. So Brendan's got it like really good because he has 2 sisters, right? So treat your sister well, and she'll make you live longer. Number 11 was probably the most intriguing one of the list because it came from the longest prospective study in the history of man. It was an 80-year study. And what they looked at is they looked at actual traits in children as predictors of longevity. And the trait that predicted the longest lives was conscientiousness. Now that is huge. What is conscientiousness? What do you think that is? What does that mean? Responsible? Sure. Yeah, moral character. I agree. I think it sounds more like a character trait than an actual, sort of quality or something like that. And they, in the book, you can look at the book on the study, they said that it's because they were conscientious to keep their doctor's appointments. Now, as much as I'd like to pat myself on the back, I don't believe that because medical science has been saying, well, we have increased the lifespan, so many years, but is that really true? Well, compared to the Dark Ages, like with the bubonic plague and stuff like that was going on and people were dying at age like 40, sure, absolutely. But if you think about Psalm chapter 90, verse 10, how long did it say people were living? 70 to 80 years. What was the U.S. average? 79. Right? So back like BC, like hundreds of years BC, David's saying, well, we live about 70 to 80 years. And now in modern medicine, post-antibiotic, post-vaccine, hot topic, post-vaccine era, right? We live how long? 70 to 80 years, right? So it's not a lot. But the average Adventist lives 89 years. That's pretty cool. We're going to get back to that. When you look at these three publications, they're from the secular literature. And as you can probably tell, they put a lot of emphasis on the physical parameters. They put some emphasis on the mental and faith-based parameters. And I would just like to get you thinking. This is just the intro to, like I said, a 13-hour presentation series that I do on this. But let me just get you thinking in a different direction. What's the secret? Why do these people live so long? Why do Okinawans, Sardinians, and Seventh-day Adventists live so long? Why, like 89 years? That's insane, right? Is it diet, right? Because Seventh-day Adventists, by and large, are what? Vegetarian, right? Or so you thought. Anyone review the latest Adventist health study? I did. What percentage of Seventh-day Adventists are now vegetarian? Who said 39? You did read the study. 39. And did you know we're not like the only people group that are vegetarians? Did you know Buddhists are vegetarians? But they don't live longer. Very interesting. So it's not merely the physical parameters. And then on top of that, did you know there's Adventists, obviously, that aren't vegetarian, right? There's 39% who are, so obviously there's got to be 61% who aren't, right? Did you know the 61% still live longer too? Yeah, it's true. Sorry. Got to be honest, right? So maybe it's exercise. Well, the bad news is that at least from the Adventist health study, about 10% of us exercise regularly. That's not great, by the way. Except for Thalia. She exercises every day, I know. Maybe it's genetics. But remember, these are like diverse people groups from all different races. So maybe not. How about optimism? Well, that helps. But it's got to be something more than that. In fact, if you look at a lot of the things that people assume make Seventh-day Adventists live longer, they actually don't hold water when you look at them really closely. Because a lot of people say, well, we keep the Sabbath, right? Have you heard that? But you know the Jews keep the Sabbath? But they don't live longer. Isn't that weird? Well, and they say, well, you know, you don't smoke and don't drink caffeine. By the way, we do drink caffeine, most of us, if you look at the Adventist health study, unfortunately. But even if all of us didn't, you know there's another denomination that doesn't smoke and drink and use caffeine? Anyone know? The Mormons. But they don't live longer. Actually, there's a couple studies, to be academically honest. They tried to look at longevity in Mormons, and they got good evidence that if you're a white male high priest that you live longer. But that's too specific of a group, and it really wasn't that strong. So that's my argument, is that if those people groups lived longer, they would be on CNN and Anderson Cooper and Oprah, right? But they're not. So, and the thing is that even when you look at Adventists, like I said, we're at our lowest level of commitment ever as a people group. And what did the secular author, the only people group who are not going down in their longevity, who was it? There's got to be something else, right? I mean, if you're going to be academically honest as a researcher, you've got to say there's something else. Because it's not vegetarianism, because Buddhists are vegetarianism too, right? The Mormons, same thing. Sabbath, the Jews. Did you know even the non-committed Adventists live longer? The ones who aren't vegetarian, and who even drink, they still live longer? Could it be that our beliefs have in and of themselves a benefit? Could it be that all these things are good, but just on their own, they're not enough? Maybe you need everything together. I'd like you to think about that during this conference and start to think outside of the box, because the 8 natural remedies is not just nutrition, right? There are other things involved. And I pray that we as a people will not just discover, but rediscover those things and share them with the world. I believe that, yes, it is faith. That's a huge component, and it's more than just the physical parameters. In fact, I believe we were designed for the best possible quality and quantity of life. It's not vain to want to be forever young, because there's a design. God wants us to prosper and be in health, just as our soul prospers, because he himself has written that desire there. He has put eternity in our hearts. Let's kneel for prayer. Loving Father in heaven, we thank you and we praise you that we can follow you, that we can learn from you, Lord, and enjoy the blessings not only of physical habits, but of mental beliefs, Lord, to have the advantage of faith, to understand who we are and who you are. And with that belief comes hope. It comes faith. There comes love. There comes security. There comes identity. There comes purpose. There comes connection. There comes belonging, Lord. I pray that all these things would come upon us, not only in theory, but in reality, so that we can reap those blessings as you designed we should, not only in this life, but for eternity. In Jesus' name, amen.